The general had been given a mission that his superiors considered simple, and by every measure available to him it should have been simple, and when it was over, he sat down to write the report that would explain why it had not been simple at all. And what he wrote in that report was not what anyone above him wanted to read. He was a Chinese commander, an experienced one, and he had been ordered to destroy the American Marine Division trapped at the Chosin Reservoir. Not defeat it, not push it back. Destroy it, annihilate it in the mountains and the cold before it could escape to the sea. And he had been given the force to do it. He had numbers that, on paper, made the outcome a foregone conclusion. He had the high ground, the cold as an ally, and an enemy that was surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off. By every calculation his own command had made, and every calculation he made himself when the orders arrived, the Marines should have been destroyed. The mission was, in the professional judgment of a competent soldier, achievable. He set out to achieve it, and he did not achieve it. The Marines came down the road and reached the sea, and his own force, which had begun with every advantage, was left battered and depleted in the mountains, having failed at the one thing it had been sent to do. And so he had to write the report, and in that report, instead of the excuses his superiors expected, instead of blaming the cold, or the terrain, or a lack of men, or any of the 1,000 things a defeated commander can blame, he wrote something else. He wrote the truth, as he had come to understand it, about why he had failed, and the truth he wrote was so unexpected and said so much about the men he had been fighting that it is the reason this report is remembered at all. If you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Let me back up, because to understand what the general wrote, you have to understand what he had expected, and why what actually happened broke every assumption he had brought to the fight. In late November and early December of 1950, the 1st Marine Division was cut off at the Chosin Reservoir in the mountains of northern Korea, surrounded by a Chinese force many times its size, on a single road, in cold that fell to 30 and 35 degrees below zero. It was, by any conventional reading, a trapped and doomed formation. And the Chinese plan for destroying it was a good plan, built on sound principles that had worked many times before, in that war and in others. The principles were these: you surround the enemy, you cut his single road in multiple places, breaking him into isolated pockets. You use your superior numbers to reduce those pockets one at a time, and you let the cold and the exhaustion and the hopelessness do half your work for you, because a surrounded force, cut into pieces, freezing, outnumbered, and with no hope of relief, is supposed to do a predictable thing. It is supposed to break. That word, break, was the load-bearing assumption of the entire plan. Not that the Marines would be easy to kill. The Chinese commander did not assume that. He assumed something subtler, and, in almost every historical case, correct, that under enough pressure, a surrounded and hopeless force loses cohesion. Units surrender. Men throw down their weapons. The formation stops being a formation and becomes a mass of individuals each trying to survive. And once that happens, the destruction is straightforward. You are no longer fighting an army. You are processing a collapse. That is what was supposed to happen. That is what the general's plan depended on, and it did not happen. Now, here's the thing. The general slowly realized as the battle went on, and it was the thing that would end up in his report. The Marines did not break. He hit them with everything the plan called for. He cut the road. He isolated the pockets. He attacked in overwhelming numbers. At night, in the cold, wave after wave against positions held by a fraction of his strength. And by every precedent he knew, that should have produced the collapse. It had produced the collapse in other enemies, many times. But the Marine pockets, cut off and surrounded and outnumbered, did not lose cohesion. They formed perimeters and fought in every direction and held. The isolated units did not surrender. They waited to be reached, and fought while they waited. The formation, cut into pieces, behaved as though each piece were still part of a whole that had simply been temporarily separated, not destroyed. And instead of collapsing inward toward annihilation, The whole surrounded mass began, impossibly, to move, to fight its way down the road as an organized force, bringing its wounded and its dead, attacking in the direction it needed to go. The general had planned to destroy a collapse. Instead, he found himself trying to destroy an army that refused to become a collapse, and that is a completely different problem, and one his plan had no answer for. Here's what doesn't make it into most tellings. The general was not a fool, and he was not making excuses when he finally understood what had beaten him. He was a professional, and professionals, the good ones, are capable of the hardest thing a soldier can do, which is to look clearly at a defeat and name its real cause, even when the real cause is uncomfortable, even when a lie would protect them better. And what he had come to understand, watching the Marines refuse to break under conditions that broke everyone else, was that he had been fighting the wrong assumption from the start. He had assumed that men break under enough pressure. It is a reasonable assumption. It is usually true. But it had a hidden condition buried inside it that he had never had to examine before, because he had never before fought an enemy for whom the condition did not hold. The assumption was really, men break under enough pressure unless something holds them together that is stronger than the pressure. And he had never met the something, so he had forgotten it was part of the equation. Stay with me, because what the general wrote is the whole thing, and it is the most honest thing a defeated man can say. He did not write that he had failed because of the cold. The cold hit the Marines as hard as it hit his own men. Harder, in some ways, because the Marines were the ones surrounded. He did not write that he had failed because of the terrain, or because he lacked men, or because of any external circumstance. All of those were available to him, and all of them would have protected him with his superiors, and he wrote none of them. What he wrote, in the shape it has come down, the exact words varying in the telling, was that he had failed because of the men he was fighting, not their equipment, not their numbers, which were inferior, not their position, which was hopeless, the men themselves. He wrote that these Marines did not behave as soldiers were supposed to behave under those conditions, that they would not break when breaking was the only reasonable thing left to do, that they fought as a unit even when cut into pieces, that they were held together by something he had not planned for and could not overcome, and that against men like that, the plan that should have worked did not work, and no plan built on the assumption that they would break was ever going to work. He wrote, in effect, that he had lost not because of anything he had done wrong by the book, but because the enemy was made of something the book did not account for. And this is where it gets complicated, because that report was, in one sense, a professional disaster for the man who wrote it. A commander who writes that he failed because the enemy was simply better made of sterner stuff is a commander offering his superiors nothing they can use and no one they can blame except, by implication, the plan and the men who made it. It would have been far safer to blame the cold. The cold cannot be demoted. The truth he wrote could end a career. He wrote it anyway, and the fact that he wrote it anyway is itself a kind of tribute, because it took a real soldier to recognize what he was looking at, and a rare honesty to record it. A lesser man would have lied and protected himself. This man looked at the Marines who had beaten him and paid them the highest compliment one enemy can pay another, which is to tell his own superiors the unwelcome truth. We did not lose because of the weather. We lost because of them. See, what most people miss about this story is that they think the interesting thing is that the Marines won. The interesting thing is why the enemy said they won, because praise from your own side is expected and discounted. Every army says its own men are brave. But when the commander sent to destroy you sits down, in the bitterness of failure, with every incentive to blame anything else, and instead writes to his own superiors that he lost because your men would not break, that is a different order of testimony entirely. That is the enemy, under no obligation to be generous, and every obligation to be self-protective, telling the truth about you, because the truth was too large to lie about. There is no higher confirmation of what those Marines were than the report written by the man who was ordered to destroy them and could not. And there is a reason this reaches past that frozen battlefield, because the thing the general could not overcome, the thing that was not in his book, was not equipment, or numbers, or genius. It was cohesion, the refusal of a group of men to become a mass of individuals, the something that held them together when every pressure was designed to pull them apart. And that something is not unique to Marines or to war. It is the rarest and most powerful thing any group of human beings can possess. The quality of not breaking into a scatter of frightened individuals when the pressure comes. Of remaining a unit. Of each person continuing to hold their peace, because they will not be the one who lets the others down. Every team, every family, every group under pressure either has that something or discovers, at the worst moment, that it does not. The general's report is a description, written by an enemy, of what it looks like when a group has it in full, and of the fact that a group which has it can survive conditions that, by every calculation, should destroy it. The general's superiors, one imagines, did not enjoy the report. But the general had done the honest thing, and in doing it, he had left behind something more valuable than a comfortable lie, a clear-eyed account, from the other side of the hill, of exactly what had beaten him. And what had beaten him was not the cold, and not the terrain, and not luck. It was men who would not break. The 1st Marine Division fought its way out of the Chosin Reservoir. It came down the single road as a formation, through the force sent to destroy it, in the killing cold, bringing its wounded and its dead, and it reached the sea. The plan to annihilate it had been sound. The force assigned to it had been sufficient, and it had failed, for the one reason the plan could not account for, and the general was honest enough to write down. The Marines who came out of Chosin did not know, most of them, that somewhere on the other side of the hill, a defeated enemy commander had paid them the highest compliment in his power. But it was paid, and it survives, and it is worth more than any medal, because it came from the one man with every reason to say something else, and the rare honesty to say the truth instead. So, whose testimony should we trust about what those men were, their own side, or the enemy who was sent to destroy them? Some would say the enemy's report proves nothing special, that every defeated commander reaches for a reason, that the enemy simply would not break, is itself a kind of excuse, a way of saying the loss was no one's fault, that a beaten general blaming the sheer quality of the other side is just a more sophisticated way of avoiding responsibility for a failed plan. Others would say the opposite, that praise from your own is cheap and praise from the enemy is priceless, that a commander with every incentive to blame the weather and instead blaming the men he fought is offering the most credible testimony that exists, and that the Chosin Marines earned the rarest confirmation a soldier can receive, to be called unbreakable by the man who was ordered to break them. Let us know where you land in the comments below, and if you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, make sure you subscribe.